Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. I'm joined by Laura Bradburn and Colin Watt. And it's something of a rarity. We have won convincingly, performed really, really well. And I think a lot of what we're going to be saying is going to be positive. Laura, where on earth have we been hiding performances like that all season?
I really don't know. Like, I hate to sound like a revisionist of some description that that was kind of like, oh, I said it. But we were talking at half time before we went on air about, I was mentioning a wee incident that I'd seen on around the 20-minute mark when Elyounoussi was over getting some refreshments and talking to Gavin Strachan and talking to John Kennedy, and he seemed really engaged and he seemed really determined, and he was offering ideas of how to overcome some of the issues they were having early on in the game. And that kind of attitude was something that I thought was a rarity and was good to see, and it obviously carried on throughout the rest of the game. He got his couple of goals, and the team in general just looked like they were engaged and up for the match. And as I was just saying before we went live there, attitude is the big difference maker, because we quite obviously have players of great ability, or certainly better ability than the majority of the teams we see in the league, and it almost makes it more frustrating for me that if we want to, we can turn up and do this to teams, and we just haven't this season.
It can certainly be frustrating. Colin, best performance of the season for you?
You often talk about a complete 90-minute performance from Celtic, and this is probably one of the best that we've had this season. To quote our good friend Anthony Haggerty, this is more like the rip-roaring, free-scoring Glasgow Celtic today. And that second half was certainly one of the best 45 minutes we've had this season. If anything, all I'm going to say for the next 20-odd minutes that we're on air is, if we do not sign Mohamed Elyounoussi in the summer, it will be the biggest disappointment and the player that genuinely got away from us, because his performances have been outstanding. That second half was unbelievable. His first goal was a thing of beauty. His second goal, every bit as good, just very similar to his goal against Falkirk last week. And if the price is £5 million, you have to take that absolutely 100% without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, you've led me on to one of my points of discussion here, Colin, and I think that Elyounoussi, had I asked that question at the end of every game this season, it would have been a mixed bag. So yeah, after today, 100% agree with you. He looks every inch the £5 million player, if indeed that is the fee that Celtic have been quoted. But again, I could have asked you that 4 or 5 weeks ago and you might have given me a different answer, or one of the ACSOM pundits might have given us a different answer, because I've asked the question numerous times about the loanees, and that hasn't always been the case. Not taken away from his performance today, I think he showed why we would be interested in buying him. I mean, he's your second top goal scorer now, isn't he? Laura, what's your thoughts on that?
Top.
Because
Edward, I think he's joint top now, 17 with Edward.
Eddie's scored over 20 now. But Laura, when you're looking at Elyounoussi after a performance like that, I'm in Colin's boat, 100%. £5 million looks like a good deal, but we've not seen it all season.
Well, yeah, that was the only kind of counterpoint I was going to make. We had that debate before the game started about, on their day, players can be great. On his day, Rogic can be great. On his day, Griffiths can be great. On his day, Christie can be great. Elyounoussi is, without doubt, if every player in the team was playing at their best, he's perhaps one of the most naturally gifted footballers that we've got. He's up there with Edward, and he's up there with Turnbull in that regard. The problem you have is that you can't guarantee that from him every game, and that's the point I was making before Colin spoke there, was he seemed particularly up for the game today. And that was what was encouraging to see. The only thing I would want guaranteed for $5 million is that you were going to get that from him much more consistently than you have. But I totally agree. If somebody could tell me he was going to turn in performances like that more often than he wasn't, then $5 million looks like a bit of a bargain for him.
I think Colin's already answered the question. If you were to sign one of the loanees for next season, I think Colin's already answered his opinion on that. Would you share that view, Laura?
I think if I could only go for one, Laxalt might edge it for me, but after
Laura.
today it's close.
Laura, what are you doing? He's scored 17 goals this season. You're getting 17 goals from a midfielder, and you're going to sign someone because he's good at streaming on Twitch. Honestly, come on.
The thing with Elyounoussi is, I've long said that we just need to find his best position, Colin. We need to know how best to deploy him. And you've seen today, and I'm going to bring in my next point. Actually, has been hijacked by Robbie, but I'll bring this in because Robbie is saying, I think the performance today shows you what good coaching does. No matter who comes in, he's going to get a better response, Colin, from certain players. There's going to be certain players who show form next season that we've been crying out for this season, and it all comes down to the coach. Now, all I'm going to say here is John Kennedy, 5 games unbeaten. Discuss.
I'll let you go first, Colin.
It's like what I was saying at the start of the game today. He's really using this as his addition. And to be fair to him, he's done a fairly decent job so far, as you said. 5 games unbeaten. The performances have certainly levelled up from what we seen before Neil Lennon left the club. We see that energy. We often talk about the team tiring after 70 minutes. That didn't look the case today. You saw that even carrying on right up to the end, getting the 6th goal late on, pushing for a 7th. So yeah, it's a definite improvement since Neil Lennon took over, but there's still a lot of question marks over John Kennedy. The fact that he didn't make a substitution in the derby until like the 78th, 80th minute, when there was a chance to go on and actually win that game. I don't know if he's tactically astute enough to become a manager, but it just asks the question, what if we'd made this decision months ago? What if he'd made this decision back in January, just to give him between now and the end of the season? How different might things have actually been? You see the players that we've just spoke about that have actually upped their game since Neil Lennon's departed the club. So players like Elyounoussi, you're getting Forrest coming back into the team. Okay, he was out injured, but there's definitely been improvements across that team. Even Ryan Christie manages to keep a shot down and put it in the back of the net nowadays.
Colin, didn't start on Ryan Christie, right? I was going to ask you in the second half, that Rabona, you must have appreciated it. You must have done.
Like, this is the quality that he has got, right? There's no getting away from the fact he's a very good player. But, I mean, his heart's clearly not in it, is it? You saw it even when he scored that goal. There was no celebration. There's no delight in the face. It was just a job's done, move on to the next one. He's another one. A bit like Odsonne Edouard, whose heart's already at his next club.
Does that concern you, Laura? The non-celebration?
Well, is that not the second time he's done that in recent weeks? He seems very, and even the last time he did it was, you could argue today, what was it, the 6th goal that he scored, maybe he's not going to celebrate as much because it was just we were on easy street by that point. But I did notice his goal against Falkirk that he did the same thing, so that would concern me as far as Christie's concerned, that his heart isn't in it. But I do probably think he's shown enough this season to get whatever move he wants to get. He's not at his best season, far from it, but as I said before the match started, I think clubs probably look at players on a longer term basis, and decisions will have been made long before. But going back to John Kennedy, for me, his addition, yes, every game counts towards any sort of reputation he wants to put forward about being manager, but for the real test for him will be the Scottish Cup. If he manages to even get to the final or to win it, then he's literally got a trophy to take into the boardroom and say, look, this is entirely mine. Because I don't think, has Neil Lennon even taken charge of a Scottish Cup game this season? I think it didn't start until after he was away. So, this is something that will be entirely down to John Kennedy if we manage to win it, especially if we can beat Rangers next week. And that's something that he can say without fear of admonishment that he says that is the trophy I won this club, and that's my kind of stamp on my desire for the job.
Now, we've done this podcast long enough for me to know that there will be comments coming in, probably filtering in after the live show, to say that, we change our tune from game to game and all of a sudden we're on the Kennedy bus, etc. I am definitely not subscribing to that in any way, shape or form. But I think it's a good point that Robbie makes. Robbie Smith, Kenny, has now put his stamp on the team. People will counter that by saying, well, he's had the influence of coaching them all season. Why didn't he do anything prior to now? All I would say is he's done himself no harm to remain at the club beyond this season. I think that there might be a position somewhere, but then that also concerns me in relation to the situation with Eddie Howe, where he quite clearly wants his own backroom team, even though the original report from Steve McGowan, Colin, stated that he was happy to continue with Strachan and Kennedy. So all I'm saying in relation to how we've played, I'm not getting absolutely carried away with a 6-0 against Livy. I'm going to enjoy it because we haven't had much to enjoy this season, but I'm not getting carried away with it. And I think it's perfect just before the game against Rangers to go out and score goals like that. Now, Laura, before we came on, we were talking about something Jock Stein used to do. And by the way, I'm not comparing John Kennedy to Jock Stein, but something that Jock Stein deliberately used to do was before big games, he would organise sometimes midweek bounce games, often behind closed doors, against lesser opposition so that we could score goals. And, he used to actually talk about it in a Celtic view, and it was all about just getting confidence. It was very basic, but I think when I look at today's result, it is a real confidence builder. We're going into the game next week knowing that, we haven't just scraped through a stodgy 1-0 or whatever it may have been, Colin. We've played with a freedom today that we haven't seen enough of this season. And one last thing about the Christie goal, in actual fact, is it was an assist from Effie Ambrose. So let's not forget Big Effie.
Cult hero Effie Ambrose.
Cult hero, yeah, one of their ones, absolutely. Before the game, our opening discussion was all around the fact that Scott Brown was playing. We were talking about sentimentality. We mentioned the fact that there's going to be a celebration on the last home game of the season where Celtic fans are to send in flags and banners, jerseys, etc., to show their appreciation of the captain, Colin. It was on the website yesterday. So I think, to be honest with you, watching that performance today, I would have probably said I was wrong to suggest that Bruni shouldn't have played. I thought he played particularly well today, Colin. What was your thoughts on Scott Brown? And of course, because of that, I would expect wholeheartedly for him to start against Rangers next week.
This was the point I was making before the game. I think Kennedy's playing this clever to the point where it's about getting the performances and getting the results on the park. And if he thinks that Scott Brown's the right person to do that, regardless of whether he's going to be here next season or not, that's who he's going to play. Just because we know Sorrow's going to be here next year and you want to see what you can get out of him, I don't think Kennedy takes that into his thought process. And as you said, I think Scott Brown had another good game. I don't think he's at the Scott Brown of the level of sort of 2, 3, maybe even 4 years ago where he can have a real influence on the game. But he still has his part to play and he done it really well. It was strange to see him in very attacking positions at the corners. Obviously, the third goal coming from his header onto, I think it was Fitzpatrick's heel. Some people say that might have been Stephen Welsh getting a toe at it. I think that might have just been a bit of desperation there, but good to see him getting in that position. And then him actually managing to get a half volley in at the goalkeeper. I mean, for the kind of age that he's at, he's what, 36 in the summer? To still have that sort of energy is extremely impressive. But as you can see, when it gets to sort of 65, 70 minutes, he's ready to come off. And that's what we should have been doing more over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, is kind of protecting him and getting him through these games. Instead, we're getting him to play 90 minutes 3 times a week. And that's when you'll not get the best out of him. That's when the performances start to dwindle because he's just not got that energy to get himself through those games anymore.
What was your thoughts, Laura? Because you've been quite candid and quite open about your thoughts on the Scott Brown situation. Judging by his performance today, he's a starter against Rangers, probably one of the first names on the team sheet, I would guess.
The one thing I would say in counterbalance to that is and to kind of expand on what Colin said about him not being the player of 3 or 4 years ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago you could have counted on him to be the reason that we played well. Today he just played well in a team that was playing well, and I think didn't put a foot wrong, and therefore, you know, made himself look as good as he could look. I think where I'm concerned about next week is that he will be a lot more at the heart of the midfield and the engine, and we all know that that's where the Old Firm matches quite often can be won and lost, and if we're coming up against better opposition, which regardless of what we think of the opposition, it will be more of a challenge than Livingston, I don't know that we can still rely on him to make that difference. But that's not to take away from the performance he put in today. He was one of our better players today in a team that was already playing very well, and that can't be taken away from him.
No, you're absolutely right there. And I think that one player who, for me, was a workhorse today, Colin, he's come in for a bit of flack throughout the season. He's certainly not had his best season, was Callum McGregor. We've spoken about Callum in relation to who takes over from Scott Brown as the captain. Were you impressed with McGregor today? Seemed to play into quite an impressive performance. For me, I thought him and Forrest were two of the best players on the park.
For me, he's always a player that I think unjustifiably gets the stick. And I think it's because you're not actually at the games anymore. You're just seeing what the camera wants you to see on the park. I think when you look at McGregor, he's always one that pass and move, get himself open and always keep himself available for the ball. And I think you appreciate that more when you're actually in the stadium and you're watching the kind of the whole pitch. When you're watching the camera, it's just the position that he's in. And again, he had a great game for me. For me, he's always been a consistent performer. I think when you look at the performances we've had this season, it's just like I said about some other players, he just kind of gets down to that level. No one has really massively stood out this season. I mean, there's been flashes of performances from certain players like Elyounoussi, like Turnbull, like Edward at times, but it's never really been like, if you had a short list for Player of the Year this year, you'd say, well, this person's a standout, and this person's a standout, and this person's a standout. They've all sort of been to the same sort of level, and that's where McGregor doesn't get the opportunity to shine, because when you're playing in a team that's playing really well, he's the guy that orchestrates everything. And when you're kind of struggling, then he is going to struggle. And that's just the kind of way it's been for McGregor this season.
When you're looking at that, Colin's talking about players not shining this season, Laura, and maybe struggling to pick a 1, 2, 3 for a Player of the Year. I definitely think Turnbull would be up there. And again, today, he ground out a performance from quite a slow start, I felt. But a big part of that, I thought, again, was due to the nature of McGregor's running. I mean, he, again, was right back to his usual 90 minute. I'd love to see his stats in terms of the distance that he's covered today. McGregor.
Yeah, it's funny, it kind of connects back to one of the comments that you brought up before about shows you what a difference good coaching can make, because we all know that Callum McGregor was one of the more candid players in his interviews, saying towards the end of Neil Lennon's tenure, he came out a couple of times and said we didn't know what the game plan was, we didn't know what we were doing. He obviously thrives in a situation where he's got a clear idea of what the game plan is, and that was certainly more the case today. And I think that's where a lot of the players have been suffering. Callum McGregor perhaps more than most, that there is a reason there's a manager of a football team, there is a reason there's a head coach of a football team, because no matter the ability of a player, they need that guidance and they need that instruction on how to beat an opposition. And if anything, Callum McGregor's performance today, the entire team's performance today, just highlights to me even more how little Neil Lennon was doing towards the end of his tenure. He was sitting with his feet up, which none of the coaching staff were doing today. They obviously had instructed their players well. They had put a tactical plan in place. It was followed to the letter by players who were enthusiastic to do it, and it came across really clearly. I know that was a question about Callum McGregor, but I went on to expand on it.
Just on a side topic, I don't know if anybody's seen, the laptop was nowhere to be seen today. The neither the laptop nor the iPad was anywhere to be seen today. It looks as if we're going back to the old-fashioned pen and paper, and we get a 6-0 victory. That's maybe just a massive coincidence.
No, I think it is an interesting point to make. There was a couple of occasions. I've been speaking to people over this season where they're saying, the only focus on the dugout when Lenny's got his feet up and Kennedy's looking totally disinterested. And I did not subscribe to that at all. I really did. I remember having a discussion about how much the management team can influence the team. And I'm a great believer that, of course, they can. They can influence what's happening on the park in many different ways, not just making the actual changes. And, some of the games that we spoke about, Laura, was games, for example, against St Mirren at home, where they beat us for the first time since 1990. And Jimmy Goodwin basically talked and shouted his team throughout the entire 90 minutes. And this is listen, it doesn't always work, because Martindale done the same today and his team got beat 6-0. But there was an issue really with, we all became body language experts overnight, and the laptop became an issue. If you're winning 6-0, nobody cares if you've got a laptop calling, But one thing I would say is, I've been bringing up the stats quite a bit, and in John Kennedy's first 4 games in charge, the stat was 97 shots at goal, 5 goals. And today, 18 shots at goal, 6 goals. So it is getting to that point where you're thinking, are we seeing progress under Kennedy? You've got to give him credit where credit's due.
I would say so. I think the one thing I would say, in contradiction to what I've said about the manager being so important, is he can't physically put the ball in the back of the net. There's an element of, we created the same number of chances against Falkirk and didn't put half the number away. And so today there was the combination of creating those chances and them going in the back of the net, which is the combination you want. Just to pick up on what Colin was saying, I get the point about there was no laptop, there was no iPad in sight. But like you say, it's one of these things nobody cares about if it's working. And I have always found the narrative around it a little bit concerning, in that some of the people who criticise the laptop and the iPad thing seem to me like people who don't want to see progress in the modern day, in the modern age. You've got to accept that we're in an age where this technology is available, and if we can use it to our advantage, then we should. The only issue we had with that, obviously, is that it seems to have coincided with all the games that we've not played so well. So it's about striking that balance and finding it. But I don't have an issue with using technology like that, as long as you're seeing the fruit be bared from it.
No, you're right.
I've just got to clarify on that. It was a completely flippant comment that we won 6-0 and it wasn't there. I'm all for the idea of bringing in the kind of stats and the analysis. Not so big on the whole expected goals thing. I'll keep that to the experts. But maybe it was just a case of the Wi-Fi being down at Celtic Park, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. Anybody who's been there.
Good point coming in from Zinco Fix. We've got to mention this because the impact that James Forrest had today was pretty clear, and he was doing things that we've been really lacking. We've been talking about a lack of width, Colin, but that's not the only thing that Forrest brings to the team, although he does bring width to the side. We're talking in the first half around his runs behind the defence, something that Lee Griffiths used to do brilliantly. But James Forrest's injury today, when you watch that rerun, it was a wee bit concerning, wasn't it? Because it's obvious that something's kind of like pinged in the back of his leg or on the side of his knee. That would be a huge blow going into next week if Jamesy can't make it. Definitely.
And it was just one of those ones he just pulled up right away. It was just a kind of, he passed the ball and he felt something. The good thing for me, and I'm not an injury expert, but when you look at it, the fact that he walked off the park suggests that it isn't that bad an injury, and saying that will probably come out tomorrow. He's not playing again till next year. But I think the fact that he walked off the park is hopefully a good thing. And if you've got James Forrest fully fit for next week, then it adds a different dynamic to your game. It's the pace. We've lacked pace this season. As much as we've had the creativity from the likes of Rogic and Turnbull, and even Christie at times as well, the pace element of getting the ball to Forrest, he takes that touch that puts the ball about 5 yards in front of him, and he still gets to it and he drives on. He shows maybe some leadership capabilities in that aspect that he's striving his team on. Flashback to Wednesday's Bulletin where I suggested that potentially he could be the captain next season. But yeah, I think he just gives you an outball, and that's what Celtic's not had this season, is that outball to get out of defence and to give the team a chance to reset, get back into the position, let Forrest run at it, and you never know what he's going to create from it.
You know, when we're looking at this season, Laura, there's been many occasions where you think, well, it can't get any worse, and then it does. That's happened all season. Surely the season's not going to boot us again by pulling James Forrest away for a few months. I mean, we've not had any update. If anybody has had an update, please add that into the comment section. But it really does show that between now and the end of the season, we need somebody like Forrest. We need that word, don't we?
Yeah, but without a doubt, he makes a difference to the team for the positive, and he's been the main difference in the way that we've performed the last few weeks. I would hate to think that he's had any major setback. The one thing that concerns me about it is I always remember the last few years of Paul McState's career being blighted by an ankle injury, which is what James Forrest has had, and it can be something that's difficult to go over for a number of reasons. Obviously, ankles are so vital as a footballer, as anybody would expect. So getting back up to fitness without redoing the injury is one difficult thing, but it also causes other issues with, you know, if you're compensating with your weight and your balance, you can cause issues with your knees, your hips, your back, all the way up, and there's a lot of players that have issues with that originates from a separate injury to do with their foot or their ankle. And so, you know, that he's not out the woods yet as far as an injury of that type is concerned. What I would hope is that we can take the positive from it, like Colin said, that he didn't look too uncomfortable when he walked off the pitch, and that it's hopefully just been a what's the phrase they're using these days, with an abundance of caution, that we've taken him off to make sure that he's available for the rest of the season and doesn't do himself worse injury.
Now, Red Scotland, who has been commenting for several months on the ACSOM Bulletin, reminds us, obviously, of the term, the old firm. I think Laura's been watching Schema Celica and had a wee ride in Kevin Graham's DeLorean. A wee slip of the tongue there earlier on, Laura, but obviously...
Listen, I've said it multiple times before, I'll say it again. It was the old firm until I was 25 years old. We're only 8 years beyond that, and I'm still trying to get used to it. So apologies. I'm aware that it doesn't exist, but I will do my best. That
was the old firm klaxon coming in. As soon as anybody says it, you just know it's going to happen. But hey, that's fine. One of the points actually that you made just before the second half kicked off, Laura, and I wanted to expand on it, but the action had started, was a very good point all around why would Celtic TV be discussing Eddie Howe. So let's have a wee chat about that. You started explaining it. It was a great point, and then we had to get back to the action. So on you go.
Yeah, no, what it says to me is that there must be some kind of, not only some kind of truth behind the rumours about how close the deal is, because we all know that that things don't go onto Celtic TV without the those at the top of the club being aware of it. So they've obviously been given permission to discuss it. But I think what it also suggested to me was perhaps they are trying to force his hand. If it's true that his agent is fishing around for other deals and that things are perhaps dragging on, I didn't see the content of what was said, obviously, but maybe they're thinking, well, if Eddie Howe's tuning in today and we openly state that we are after him, maybe it's going to pressure him into a decision. Now, I don't know that this is all speculation, and if that is the way that they're choosing to handle it, I don't know that it's going to be the wisest move, but it definitely suggests to me that openly talking about him in that sense, when we've been quiet as a club for so long about it with nothing really official coming out, it suggests to me a kind of change in tact about how we're trying to get the deal done.
I'm looking at the Eddie Howe situation at the moment, and obviously it's on the tip of all of our tongues. It's on a daily basis on the bulletin being discussed, because I think there are a huge amount of Celtic fans willing the deal to be done. We want the club to do the deal. And I think what it comes down to really, Colin, is any manager who has been out the game for a wee while, there's an entry level back into the English game. Mm-hmm. Now that entry level, let's think back to when Brendan Rodgers came to Celtic. What do you think his entry level was, and was it better after him having success at Celtic? Well, I think his entry level would have been nowhere near a Liverpool when he was coming back into the game when he came to Celtic. He's come to Celtic, he was a huge success domestically, not so much in Europe. And then he's able to get a job like Leicester, and you've seen what he's done there, and you ask yourself, what would his next job be should he decide to leave Leicester? And it's, he's up in the higher reaches of the English divisions. Where is Eddie Howe now? Eddie Howe, for me, people have mentioned the fact that Sheffield United wanted him in. There's been mentions of Crystal Palace, Newcastle. These are bottom half of the EPL teams, or even Championship teams if you look at Sheffield United next season. And you also look at Newcastle, Crystal Palace. Within the last 8 years, they've spent time in the Championship. That's his entry level at this moment in time. So if that's the kind of clubs he is maybe waiting for jobs to become available at, then for me, I think the rest of his managerial career will be at that level. The only way he's going to get a higher entry level is by going away and being a success somewhere else like Celtic. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. If you're kind of waiting for a team to decide whether they're going to get relegated into the Championship to decide whether you want to go and manage them next season, it's not a position you want to find yourself in. I think personally, Howe does want the Celtic job, but I think he also wants the control of having his own people in, being able to run the kind of football side of the club his way, and not being forced upon him. Guys like Kennedy, guys like Strachan, and to be fair to him, that's not unreasonable. If you want someone to come in, you want them to do the job. We spoke about it when Neil Lennon came in, and we spoke how he was given John Kennedy, he was given Gavin Strachan, he was given Nick Hammond. It wasn't the guys that Neil Lennon wanted, and then look what happened. You're seeing a totally different side now under John Kennedy than what you ever saw under Neil Lennon. They're playing a completely different style of football. So if you want to come in and you want to back your manager, you don't just back him in the transfer market, you back him with the correct staff as well. So if Howe wants his men in, then and you want Howe, it's a complete no-brainer. You give him that, you give him who he wants in. But if you're going to force it upon him, no matter how much he wants the job, he's got to look at it and say, well, if I fail at this job and I've got my own guys in, then it's all on me. But if I fail and I've not been given the right resources, what could have happened? So it's a difficult one for him to make his mind up.
I noticed that the two front runners, even though the job isn't available yet, for the Republic of Ireland job are Roy Keane and Neil Lennon. So let's hope that Roy Keane gets that one, Laura. But one final point before we go, and this is coming from Killian C, Welsh's Miles of Julian. I've actually got a wee note here to say that I think Stephen Welsh has been a real asset since he came into the side. He may not be a first pick next season, but I'll tell you what, he has done himself no harm in terms of his own development. I think back to that Rangers game, I think it was back in September, October time, the 2-0 game at Celtic Park, Laura, and the disappointment in young Welsh, who really was just thrown into that, wasn't he? He was thrown in to the melting pot that became Celtic's season. And I just think that he shows a bit of a maturity. I know that you've seen him up at Morton, Colin, before. We've probably seen much of him at Celtic. And he's got a composure about him as well. And I've liked what I've seen of Stephen Welsh. As I say, I still think we need two centre-halves in pre-season. But he should be getting plenty of games next season as well for me. I think he's done well this season.
Yeah, well, I mean, Cameron Harper was miles off Edward. The point is, like, he's just come into the team. He's 6 or 7 years younger than Julian. I personally think for a guy who is as inexperienced at the first team level for Celtic as he is, he's not really put a foot wrong for me. I think he's shown enough to stake more of a permanent place in the team next season. And yes, he might be miles off Julian at the moment, but perhaps the chance to play with him, assuming that Julian comes back from injury with no hitches next season, the chance to play alongside him, to learn from him, to improve his own experience. I think he he's got all the makings there of being a perfectly good, if not an excellent centre half. And I think to judge him now in comparison to a player who's played for a lot longer is a bit unfair.
Yeah. Now, it's a bit of a rarity that we're all going off quite happy after watching Celtic this season, but we have covered every single game. I don't know how many fixtures we've had this season, Colin. Maybe we should check it for the Rangers game. We've covered every single game, and we'll continue to do that even beyond this season, because it might involve us getting a wee camper van or something with a satellite dish on the top of it, Colin, when we're actually back in the ground. But we'll continue to cover every game, and we'll be back to you on Monday at 12:30 for the Bulletin. So thanks everybody for getting involved on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. A wee reminder, if you're on YouTube, get subscribing to the channel. We're putting out multiple items of free content every single day, 21 broadcasts a week on average across all the shows. So all that's left for me to say is Colin Watt once again, and Laura Bradburn, thanks for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you.